This is the ultimate guide to the big travel camera, also known as the Big T. It is inspired by the Polaroid Big Shot portrait camera. It's designed to let you shoot on multiple formats from Polaroid 600 size to Instax wide, 4x5 with the multiple backs that there are for those formats, including 3x4, and my Polaroid Go back as well, which is coming soon in the next few weeks. So I'm going to go over all the tools that I use, some of the tips, tricks, and techniques, since just about everything that I know is utilized in this build, at least how to get around cleaning up and putting together plastic camera parts. So I highly recommend watching this video all the way through once so you understand all the steps and avoid any mistakes. But yeah, apologies ahead of time for some of the audio in these clips. I was working in my garage with so many things going on. But yeah, let's get started. So let's start off with the beginning. These are pretty much the tools that I use to clean up the print from the moment I lift off the print from the bed. Something like this, for example, it will have supports. So I will use a number 18 chisel or number 17 chisel and or to work my way through the pieces, carefully, obviously making sure that your hand is away from the direction that your blade is going in. Or if you have no choice, just be careful, but slowly trying to peel it apart, piece it apart, clean it up. You'll go in both directions since there's a beveled edge and a flat edge. So sometimes I will utilize this. I'll scrape. So I'll scrape whatever doesn't need to be there. It'll come out. Utilizing the tip to poke around. So it's very versatile. This is my favorite of all the X-Actos, or the hobby blades, I guess, if you will. I actually like having two, a sharp one and a blunt one. The blunt ones are much better at removing supports because then they don't bite into the plastic accidentally, and then they're also a little bit safer, so you don't always have to worry about slicing off a finger or something like that. But yeah, sometimes if you've got to do this and put your fingers in danger. It's hard to avoid sometimes, but for those cases I always like to do something like this, because then I know it will only go so far. If I'm doing it towards myself, I know that there's no way I can go all the way actually towards my belly. It'll just flick down at the most, if my movement is just wrist movement and not arm movement. So anyway, just some tips there for some of you beginners who are brave enough to start your journey with this type of project. So yeah, that's two very important parts of 3D printer cleanup, 3D print cleanup, and obviously your tweezers to remove stuff from little places. This tool is a very awesome tool. I replaced it a couple of times. I always break them because I just put them through so much. It's called a spudger, for those of you that don't know, S-P-U-D-G-E-R. How I remember it, because I always forget that. I used to forget the name of it. I call it SpongeBob SquarePants. So now that I know that it's called SpongeBob SquarePants, I never forget that it's called a spudger. Typically used for taking apart mobile devices, phones, just to open them up, or it's like a pry bar type of thing. But it's very useful to get into some places of the 3D print where you don't want to get an X-Acto knife or any sort of blade in there that could get stuck, or at least not help scrape well enough. So obviously flush cutters, you should have a set of those if you're following all the right 3D printer channels, or with some of the things that you've purchased over time, they've been included. But these are my favorite. I think they're called the Italian style, or just Italian made. Yeah, it's made in Italy. One of those comes with your printer most of the time. I think this one came with the Prusa, and I've had it the whole time. The burring tool, very, very handy. I don't see usage of a lot of these. Whenever I ask people if they've got one, they don't normally have one. I learned how to use one of these from an old job where I was supervising an injection mold operation. And these were used a lot just to deburr the edges, to clean any edges, but also to just shave things down. Like I had a situation here where, like this, for example, this part was face down on the printer, texture down. So I've got it squishing a little so that the texture doesn't show any lines at all. And sometimes that gives me a little bit of elephant's foot on the inside. So this sort of tool, helps kind of finely shave that just a little bit at a time without doing too much damage. Just a little bit of fine shavings if I don't want to risk doing it with an X-Acto blade, which I think is probably what most people would do, something like that. right? And then you'd end up with some sort of jagged edge. This helps control it so much better because it's got a swivel. It's pretty awesome. Like for holes, for enlarging holes, you can do that. You just enlarge the hole. It didn't do anything there, but if you had a hole where you were trying to enlarge, and you get it on the inside, and you can kind of carve it out. So deburring tool, very awesome thing to have. Then my number 11 blade for just any fine tuning, and I've got these couple of sanding sticks for any just fine sanding down of surfaces. And typically when I want to flatten a surface, my approach is, not this one, I'll use this as an example, but if it was only a finishing surface, like on the outside, because I don't want to damage too much. But let's say like here, if I wanted to clean that up, first I'd remove any plastic with the hobby blade, and then I would do the 1 and 2s, just sand anything down. Like so, just so nobody hurts themselves on that edge. And if I've got touch-up paint that'll match, then I'll put it on there. Or if I've got other sort of glossier liquid that I can put on there, like little glossy enamel or a semi-gloss that you can do to hide any spots where you scuffed up carbon fiber. So with black, it's a lot easier because you can get a satin black paint, and that'll cover most carbon fiber black materials pretty nicely. With the blues and other colors, you gotta get pretty creative. But anyway, so like having a little drill bit here. This is a 5/64, I believe. Yeah, 5/64, used to enlarge the small holes. So I always mandatory do that, just so I don't get any resistance only on the holes where I'm going to use a nut, right? On the front here, these I want the screw to self-tap itself in there. So these are just starter holes, and then the screw will create its own thread there. So this drill here is pretty awesome. I love it a lot. It's very low speed, and the number 1 torque setting is perfect for plastic. I do wish the number 3 setting would be perfect for plastic, but at least the number 1 is. But that's more than I need for either carbon fiber or PLA. Anything that's not too soft, the number 1 setting will automatically stop the drill essentially when it's as tight as it can be. And then usually when I need to go back in, I just have to hand tighten, maybe like not even a quarter turn. So it gets very, very close to almost all the way, so it won't damage your plastic. I use it a lot because typically they tell you don't use a power tool in plastic, and you shouldn't for that reason, because it's very hard to find a power tool that won't make you drill through your plastic with a screw when you just wanted to make it basically hand tight. So very good time saver. But otherwise, I'm just using my screwdriver setup. I am starting to move to mostly Phillips head screws. I'm moving away from the M2, M3, M1, because then you have to have like 3 or 4 different, wrench sets depending on the screw size. So I still have this one on the board because I've still got a couple of hex screws to get rid of. But otherwise, we're moving to Phillips to keep things more uniform across the board. I've got my big flathead here for making it easier to install the tripod sockets. And then a pencil, any kind of pencil, so you can leave marks here and there when you want to align things. The pencil is going to come especially handy when you're aligning the rangefinder once you're calibrating it. So that's it for the tools. Just about the only other things that I use is a flat black paint from some type. I think this is black 1.0 or 2.0, but flat black acrylic to flock the inside of all the camera areas to prevent reflections. And also to help with any light sealing, but this material is pretty light tight. And obviously crazy glue with this type of tip on there. I swear by this type of tip. This type of tip is on there kind of permanently. I have not removed it. I haven't even closed it. If I did worry about it hardening in there, then I would just put in like a acupuncture needle through the top to kind of act as a plug. But I actually leave it unplugged, and what happens is the top will seal in with a little bit of glue that hardens there, and it kind of acts as a lid. So when I'm ready to use it, because this is material that you can chip the glue off of, I just chip the glue off, and then now I'm ready to go. So yeah, very awesome, very useful, very slow dripping tip so that you can not make a mess, because it is very easy to make a mess with super glue. Biggest tip there actually, honestly, if you really want to make nice looking print builds and then not have to go and touch up paint just about anything. I did forget a few tools, so here they are now. First, a set of tweezers that have been bent at the tip, as much of a bend as you can. You might not be able to accomplish an L shape, but these have been worn down over time and I've trimmed them down. But originally there's, you always get those pointy ones that have an angled tip. So those are the ones that I recommend the most. I'll show you closely on the screen right now. And then also where these come in handy is on the screen I'm showing you the section where this tool is the most important. In this area is where you will get deep down in there and get the plastic out. And again, this is to prevent any plastic from getting into the path of the screw and then jamming the screw inside of the nut. And then you won't be able to get it out if the nut starts spinning freely inside of that hole and basically destroys all the plastic around it. Rubber mallet, very helpful when you're gonna be hammering in all the magnets. Spanner wrench, you're gonna need that to make sure that you secure the lens onto the lens boards. I like using a little bit of grease. I use helicoid grease, but you can use any other sort of lubricant on any lock areas so that they are functioning smoothly and don't get caught up. And then glue stick, I'll show you where I use this in a moment, but this is more of a helpful aid. You don't necessarily need it, but it does come in handy in the next step when we start putting together the rangefinder. And then lastly, a caliper of some type just to measure things along the way as you go, double checking your stuff. It's always handy to have. So yeah, that is it for the tools that you need. Now let's go over some of the components that you see. So I've already got the lens assembled on the lens board, and then there's a decorative spacer in there that looks a lot better on the Copal Zero lenses. There aren't many Copal Zero lenses though, so usually you're dealing with the Copal 2, or Copal 1, sorry. But in this case, it's kind of hidden, so only you really appreciate it. It is a design feature that I wish would have been more prominent when everybody's looking at it, but at least you can kind of see it there. So if you're using some sort of contrasting color, it still gives it a good look when you're moving the camera around and then looking at it in different vantage points. So anyway, so lens board, spacer attached there. If you've seen the other videos, you'll know that once you start calibrating the camera, then you're gonna probably decide to reprint this lens board and then start changing it in size, or going with one of the other ones that have a thicker spacer to push it out because you probably feel like it's too zoomed out. So the way I've designed the camera is so that on 210mm lenses, it's more than likely very zoomed in, so you won't have a too tight of a portrait. You then need to more than likely increase that spacer. But for most lenses, you'll find that that spacing might be suitable. I personally don't like the original Big Shot proportion. It's too zoomed in for my liking. I like actually bringing that size back out a little bit, like the Instax, increasing some room, especially since the Instax frame is so narrow, and then use my Polaroid attachment when I want a portrait much tighter from the top and bottom. So that's basically how I'm designing this, is that you want your head and shoulders portrait with your 600 type film. You want maybe a little bit more body, a little bit more with the Instax wide, and then you've got your 4x5 to get even more, of the body, potentially a couple or a group inside of that shot with the 4x5. So you want a very super tight portrait of just basically head only, head and shoulders. Then you'd go with the Polaroid Go frames, and that actually ends up looking like kind of like a nice little passport size portrait photo. So that's essentially how I've built this system to pan out, so that you're really only changing the format when you want a different when you want more of the model, but it's still that same distance from the subject. So yep, last thing I'll mention here is the back of the lens board. You want to make it flat black, so I will bring in some of the paint to paint this completely before I add the lens on there. Right now I did this just because I'm going to test it first to decide if I need to move the lens out a little bit more to zoom into the subject as I just finished explaining. This is the front standard. I've already cleaned up the supports, but you'll print it face down and it'll have a lot of supports that you'll have to get out of it and flatten out. It doesn't need to be incredibly flat. I have built in enough space so that the lens board will clear and then fit in there nicely. So don't worry about having to make it too perfectly flat. And then, as I showed you earlier, you want to enlarge the holes so that the screws go in and out of it a little bit easier. This piece will be attached by these 4 screws over here. They're M2 by 12. And these 2 pieces will act as a locks, top and bottom, that will get installed by M2 by 8s with washers. And these do not take nuts. They'll go right and bite into the plastic. These do take nuts to secure the whole standard, and then the nuts are installed in the next piece. Next, we've got the A section. So it's the section that follows the front standard. So it'll go like so. You'll place the nuts in here, so word of warning is always make sure that this path is perfectly clear. You'll also want to use your drill to enlarge these holes all the way down so that the screw moves in nicely. You don't have to do that, but I do find that if you don't enlarge the holes, the screw, while it will be more snug, it will push down plastic that could end up getting caught and jamming your nuts. And then it's really hard to take that out. You basically have to heat it up and melt your way out. It's just a mess. Once you jam a nut in there and they just start spinning in there freely, you're pretty screwed. And then up here is where you will install the cold shoe. It has its own rail up here. And these square openings is where you drop the nut in there, and the nut glides on the rail on the inside. That's where you'll use something like here, this start the nut up on the screw like so, and then you just pop it into the rail. And then once you get to the position that you want, then you just tighten it up and then you'll be good. All right, that's on the front, and this should have been the print surface, so make sure that that's smooth. Make sure that everything does not leave any major gaps all the way around, though this is a mechanical light seal here that will come into this channel to prevent any light leaks. So, but I do recommend that just out of precaution, you put a little bit of paint, your flat black paint, in the channel and in any other surface. So not absolutely needed, but we are dealing with light. Sometimes light can really seem like it acts like water, and then just spills in from wherever it can. So always have extreme precaution. So now let's get into this side of things. So how the bodies interconnect is with this essentially tongue and groove system, where you grab the one section, you bring it in from the top, and see it interlocks. And once it's interlocked, it's on there, right? And then it slides off like that, right? But that's not enough, because you could still knock it out and then knock it over when you put it down. So it needs to hold in there. And I didn't want to have a whole intricate set of locks on the bottom, so my clever way around that is to use magnets. So here's where these magnets come in, these long magnets. For the main body, you'll use 8 of them, and then you'll need another 2 for the Instax wide back, and then another 2 for that back. And the way I install these is like so. So be mindful of the orientation. Let's just grab a couple of them right at the moment. And then the way I'll do it is I'll put them in pairs like that, and I'll feed it in there, right? So very important before you do anything, before you glue them in there, to avoid having to reprint the body. Make sure that you have cleared out everything from there. Visually inspect it and make sure. Now fortunately this is an up piece, so they didn't take any supports, but on one like this piece where it supports printed on it on this side, then you do want to make sure that at least no any overhangs are not interfering with the magnet falling down all the way, because you do not want to have the magnet pop out, because then you'll have a gap all the way around. So be super careful with that. All right, so here I will drop in just out of precaution, not too much glue, just a little bit of glue there and a little bit of glue there, because the magnets will hold down fine. I just want to give it a help, because if I did need to remove the magnet for any reason to save the rest of the part, then at least I only have to split apart with the blade in there, just a little bit of glue. Pop that in there and press it down, and use that one to press it down, and you remove this. So feels good. I've added enough space, about 1/4 of a millimeter, so that it doesn't have to be flush with the top. It sinks in a little bit. That way, in case you did have some debris fall in there, it's not going to be the end of the world. So all right, so now that we know that that one is that way, I like keeping track of the polarity of the magnets, making sure that they're always headed in the same direction. So then I'll do something like this. So that means those two I want to put down here, right? So I'm going to save that orientation. I already had a little bit of glue there, so I'm going to pop that in there, right? And now I know this is my orientation. Now I know that these two magnets, see that I still have on there as just placeholders. You know, make sure you don't accidentally glue it. And be very careful. These are very strong magnets, so be very careful. Try to use 2 hands actually, because one hand you could pinch your skin, so precaution. Please don't mess up your fingers. Don't blame it on me. All right, so now that we know that which direction those need to go on, then I would immediately on the next section start there first. Obviously, once you've cleaned everything, at least the openings for the magnets, then you're good. See, so then now you know what another two, we'll start off with this one over here. See, my gloves get caught, so you see how your skin could get caught in there if the gloves are getting caught. So now we know that the polarity has to be in that direction, right? So I need to then add my little bit of glue here, add my little bit of glue there. Then I know, okay, they're in that section. Then I know that this one needs to be, this one right here needs to be this other way, right? Because it mated with that other one. So there's a little bit of, oh, see, I didn't clear it perfectly, so I got to clear that out. There's a little bit of debris getting in the way there. All right, let's try that one more time. See, that one needs to go now in that way. Keep track of it, keep track of it. Bring it over here. Drop it in, like so. Here's your other magnet to help push it down. Lightly tap it to make sure. And you know, I could feel the attraction, so we know that we did it correctly. Now we do this bottom side. So similarly, I will grab my other helper magnet here just to help this one, so I know that that one needs to go and flip over like so. So I'm going to grab it and then rotate it that way and then slide it in. And then here's where I can use, if I didn't want to use a helper, for your last one you won't have an extra magnet, or you might, but you know, light taps, it might sound loud on the audio. All right, now let's see how that works now. So we've got our A section and B section. Now the magnets are going to be trying to pull you, but once it's in there, you know, and obviously the camera is not designed for you to be waving it around. It's basically just, you know, use it in position to shoot and then set it down while you move around. Yes, you could carry it around with you, but you know, baby it, cradle it. It is a large contraption. It is essentially like you're moving around an entire 4x5 rig, portrait rig, handheld, like bellows, full draw. So you wouldn't be trying to move that around because of all the pieces. This build helps make it a little bit easier to get more mobile and move around and get around your subject without having to move a tripod or anything like that. But it's still, and yes, it's got places for you to put a strap on it. That's really just so you can have it at your side and then walk around carefully around your model to guide your model so that you don't actually have to be holding it. But it's not really designed for you to be walking on a photo walk with it, or just, you know, walking through a building and just bumping into things. No, that's not recommended. You know, this is very much a studio type of device, or a, you know, I'm just in one big room, I'm moving from place to place, kind of like a Polacon, that sort of thing, a party. But you're not traveling a city with it. You're not you're doing photo walks, as I said. So that's essentially how the sections come together. You're going to do the exact same. Look at here, we've got something to clear out there. So you're going to do exactly the same thing for the next section, or that section, or that section. This is A section, B section. This is the M section, because once you add this section, then it allows you to add the Polaroid back. And the Polaroid back slots into the back here, like so. Once we get to this section, this is the Instax wide, so it actually goes this way. So this is your Instax wide section. So you put your Lomograflok here, and we'll build this out in a moment. I'll go over what that is. So that's essentially the main body. Once you have it in this configuration, again, you'll swap those two out, but in order to reach full coverage on the 4x5, you'll remove this section here, and then this would install right here, and that's your 4x5 camera. All right, so let's keep going with parts. Now, final note, I missed it on the front standard, but these in the middle hole take these knurled thumb screws to act as a lock, and those will lock in the holes up there. Right, so it also acts as just a little handle. So these are slide locks to lock the lens board in place. And once it's assembled, I'll show you what that looks like. Just so we finish addressing the remaining of the screws here, this last screw is for the cold shoe there. Now let's go on into the main components of the rangefinder. In this rangefinder, we've got the body section, the viewfinder section at the top, the bottom section, and the mount. Lock slot facing the camera person, and then the sunk screws will align with, I've got this flipped around like so. Right, so that goes in there. Right, we've got the lock that helps lock the rangefinder to the body. Since it's the handle, we don't want the body to fly off of the handle. And then these tubes allow the pivot of the rangefinder. Something that's brand new that I changed up is the focusing patch is no longer inside of the body like it is on the Big Roid and the Big Wide. I made it so that it actually rotates with the top part. So it makes, it takes one step out of the calibration. Usually if once you rotated it, you saw that the patch wasn't centered, then you had to reprint the patch, or at least adjust the rotation of it. Now you no longer need to do that. We're just using a circle focus patch to just make it so much simpler. One less modification that you do. You want to glue somehow your Mylar on there. It's a little colored Mylar, and then that goes in there. And then this would go in there like so. Right. So then this is what slides in here, and then that's what pivots, what this pivots off of. All right, and then when you're ready to glue it down, you'll glue it down. And this is what I mean, when you're doing calibration, you'll be rotating this. It's got to be snug enough so that it stays still, but that's why I added these screws. These are not screws meant to tighten it down. These screws now are really just meant to hold it in place while you're calibrating so that it doesn't move too freely, right? Because you don't want it to move on you while you're adjusting. You want it to have just enough friction so that it's not very easy to move, right? Only if you purposely want to adjust it a little bit, right? And then when you're done, like let's say it has to be like right there. I'll go over it again when we do the calibration, but just so you know it here, and you get some repetition of it so you don't miss this part. Then I'll do like a couple of like 3 pencil marks, right? And then that way when I'm gluing it together, I know that I want to align those pencil marks as closely as possible, okay? So that's the top part of the pivot on the viewfinder side, and then there is the bottom side. Works pretty much the same way. This is the part that goes here and it pops in there. So you see this right here, always make sure you clean it up so that it's nice and flush so you don't have any issues. And again, when you put that in there, it should be a little bit snug. If it's too loose, there's things that you could do. If you don't want to use the screw to kind of hold it and tighten it in place, you could also just add a little bit of tape. Maybe just one small patch of tape is enough. You don't need to add tape all the way around. Just start with like a little small piece, and that may be enough to give it some friction all the way around. So now to assemble this together, it takes 2 M3 by 20 screws going through here, and then on the inside there's holes for nuts. Okay, somewhere in there, yeah, you could see it there. All right, so nut goes in there, screw hole in there. You'll assemble this first. I always recommend add some super glue. You want the rangefinder to be super solid, so you don't risk any sort of cracking or hear any cracking that may make you freak out. You know, just glue this whole thing together very well, avoid problems. Little lock over here on the side, as I mentioned, helps you lock the rangefinder to all of that. You know, still need to pop some supports off of that. That's a locks area right there. Inside of the rangefinder uses these pivots. So I am using TPU. If you don't use TPU for these pivot discs, you're gonna have a hard time. Just having something rubbery makes the whole adjustment a whole lot easier. And these essentially hold the 2 mirrors that I pre-cut. And check out the other video to find out how I cut them. You could use a snap and score method, but for something this small, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes and go through a lot of pieces. But you know, the whole sheet is 12 by 12, so you've got a lot of material to work with. But you know, these rubber pieces is what holds the mirror in place inside of these. You have another one there. So there's film on there that you should remove. I think I'll try to mention it again when I put it together, but I remove the film and then I still keep the film so that when once I calibrate and I have everything in place and I add super glue to basically hold it in place forever, I quickly throw these plastics back on there, because sometimes depending on the super glue that you have, or the CA glue, it'll bloom onto the mirror and it'll kind of fog it a little bit. And if you had your thumbprint on there, it actually fogs your thumbprint onto the mirror, and it's kind of annoying. A couple of finishing items here. The frames, once you calibrate, you'll add these on there. You can print those in whatever color you like, and they'll pop on here in the front. There's one thing missing here that I didn't include, that I will for when I show you how I put together the rangefinder and start calibrating, is there's another piece of clear plastic that I add. You could use any sort of clear mylar to do it that you've got around the house, or even as long as it's a stiff enough plastic to stay in there once it's popped in there. If you use Polaroid transparencies, or you know how to do Polaroid transparencies or emulsion lifts, take one that you've messed up and just emulsion lift it, and then use the mylar from the Polaroid for that nice clear mylar. Is very helpful. And as a matter of fact, that's what I'm gonna do for this. So kind of test that theory out. I actually have never done it before. It's only something that I've ever thought about because I've got enough hard plastic. All right, now the last thing that we've got here, these little magnets go with the diffuser frame, And once you've got the magnets in there, it takes 3 on this side and then 3 on the front standard side, and then this will just pop onto there with the magnets. So there's no more screws. Just to avoid that, I figure the magnets are strong enough. I don't typically have a problem. And then the other thing too is, what happens is when you're carrying the camera around improperly, one of the first things to do is that this flies off. And this piece of it flies off. It hardly will ever break. You know, whatever you've got in there, the cards for diffusing, they're plastic, so they're not going to break. Nothing's going to break, but what's going to happen is it's going to start conditioning you to be careful with the camera. And that's why I made it this way, because I realized that because of how portable I made it, I was flinging the camera around, and you've got an expensive, heavier lens on there compared to the lighter weight of this camera, compared to a big 4x5 camera. So you're gonna disregard safety a little sometimes. And so this is the reminder, guys, if this thing starts flying off, you know that you're being too aggressive, you're maneuvering your camera too much. It's time to start setting it down more when you're going to be moving out and about. Or don't have it on you as if it's like, you know, a rifle or another camera. Always be holding it with your hand, even though you have a strap on it. Have one hand on it. I can never stress that enough, folks. I don't want you to destroy this. It takes a long time to build this camera, a lot of material. Please don't ruin your camera by waving it around and all that stuff. So now let's go over the Lomograflok section. So here we have another set of long magnets, 2 for this section. So you basically put them the same way, and then you'd guide yourself by the B section. So once the magnets are added to this side, always test fit things first before you commit yourself to putting any magnets. This goes like so. So we know that. All right, that's good. Sits down all the way. You know, there's a seam, but not too big of a seam. So, okay. Looks fairly okay. No issues. So if there are no issues, then you install the magnets similar to how I showed you on the previous section. Now this section is designed to be essentially a Ligero LG adapted to the Big Shot system. So it's going to combine in very, very similarly the same way. So if you want to know how that is put together, go and check out the instructions for that Ligero LG. But basically, we've got the handle that comes in on this side, and as you can see, the M3 screws, these ones here, will come in through the inside here like so, and then go into there. You'll put nuts in there. So yeah, and that's installed that way. All right, this little cap is designed to match the body, and the way this goes is right up here. So essentially gives it that completing look. And now when you install these, they should not be tight because this is a lock. So they need to be, you know, tighten them down first in the far open position. And then don't tighten them too tightly because they should still have some sort of friction, but movement, okay? Because this is gonna be the movement of this piece. This piece up here is just one pass-through 2x12 that come in. Actually, no, you know what? I do have a nut, sorry. So it does take a nut on this side. Now this top rail goes up here. I left those holes in there, so ignore them. It only uses, you're only gonna use these 3 holes. So you know, that installs up there. Nuts on the inside. And also installs with M2 by 12 screws. Work perfectly in there. All right, and then the cold shoe, once you have that in there, the cold shoe here only installs with 1, it only needs 1. You're not gonna put anything super heavy on there. As long as it's down tight, you know, then that's essentially what it looks like in the end. Now, before you assemble this piece, there's one thing that you need to do. I need to add these channels here. These, let's call them lock tabs. I think that's what I call them. So they go into these channels here. So you're always going to want to check the fitment of them first before you glue anything. They do need to be glued. They're not designed to be pressure fit only. So make sure that the channel is clear as possible, because you want it to be flush, right? At least the lower lip part inside. You want to be flush. So if the overhangs are drooping too much, then you're not going to have flushness. It's not going to be flushy. All right. Do the same thing there for both pieces, okay? So once you've determined that there is fitment and everything is cleaned out, then you would just remove it. And I usually just lift it up a little bit like that. And then with my little nozzle in there, just add some glue, not too much, because when you press it down, it will over squeeze, and then might make a mess. So just add enough to the middle and then let it expand out once you press it down. All right, so you're gonna do that on both sides with, if you can tell the orientation there, that it should be. Yeah, that's the orientation. All right, and then you install them to the top. All right, so that's that. Then the bottom lock, oh yeah, obviously you clean all this stuff out. I hadn't done that here yet, but clean all that supports out. And once you do clean those supports, that was a support, yes. Once you clean out the supports, then you have to put in the lock. As you can see, that's the lock path there. This needs some cleaning, so with a blade, I will shave that back some, but it should be like so. Lock. And then the way this attaches is, you'll have it up like so, thread the screws in there, it's another 2M by 12, and then the nuts are on the inside. Pop the nuts in there, screw them in there. This should also have, make this a little bit looser because it does have to have a little bit of wiggle. And then once you put your Lomograflok in there for the first time, only because prints are different and depending how much squish you have on your first layer, essentially, is why you need to leave it a little bit loose. And then tighten it down a little bit more once you can see what kind of tightness it takes to lock in the Lomograflok back. So that's how that comes out. That's essentially it for the Lomograflok section. And then lastly, once you have everything in place, I do add on these two screws a little bit of, if you've got any leftover foam later or just from one of these, grab some pieces. And then once the nuts are in there and once this is installed, just stuff that with foam. Just in case, once you already put this foam, the light sealing foam, onto the entire surface, if for some reason you wanted to change the color of this, this weld is so deep for the nut that once you remove this, the nut will be floating around and it might be a little bit difficult to get it to seat all the way to the bottom again. So it's just something that I do at the end to make it easier for myself in the future, is make sure that the M3 nut is blocked in there with something. And yep, that's about it for that section. Now again, I'm not the perfect at these videos. You know, it is really so much easier for me to build it and then come back and explain it. Just, you know, I got the dryer going and kids in the background, so hopefully that doesn't bother you. But yeah, that's why it's really difficult for me to just record a whole run through the entire mod. Some things I have to overdub, some things I can include the recorded audio. It depends. This is one of those sections where I have to overdub some audio so I can go over this hardware, as I made a few mistakes, and I wanted to reiterate some things. So let's start off with these two screws here that will hold the grip for the Lomograflok section. Those are M3 by 26 screws, I believe. Then these two here are M2 by 8. They are meant to hold the rangefinder. I showed those earlier, hold the top and bottom pieces onto the rangefinder loosely, loose enough and tight enough so that you can rotate them freely. This is another M2 by 8 that's designed for the lock. Then I've got some M2 by 12 screws that are going to be used on the Lomograflok, in the 4x5 piece. Then up there I've got the M3 by 8 countersunk screws, and these are meant to go on the RF mount piece, which will be used to slot them into the bodies of both, similarly to how my RB67 back is, using these countersunk screws as a slotting mechanism. And here's where they go. And every of the rear sections has that sort of configuration. And you'll clip the rangefinder in there and then lock it in place. You'll see that in action further down the video. One important thing about this area, and you want these countersunk screws to be nice and tight. Obviously not too tight that it takes too much force to get the rangefinder out of there. But they have to be tight enough so that the whole weight of the whole body isn't causing it to jiggle on the rangefinder. It cannot be that loose. I just would not trust it. So make sure that those are fairly tight. If even you feel you can't get them anywhere between tight enough and loose enough, then you can probably scuff up some surfaces or do something there to add some friction if it's staying too loose. Let's see, next up we'll go over the tripod sockets. There's two of them. One of them goes on the B section over here on the left, and the other one will go on the 4x5 section. So they'll be very useful when you want to calibrate them. That's the main purpose of the tripod socket, is really to just assist in the calibration. Next we have some more M3 screws. Now those longer ones are for that grip, but these right here are for that mount that I was showing you. I've switched to M3 by 16 on those. In this video I was using M3 by 20, but I've decided to just edit the part and use M3 by 16 because I just have a ton of those screws, and then for people in general the M3 by 20s are harder to get a hold of. Now for the Lomograflok, the lock, that takes two M2 by 12s along with their corresponding nuts. The cold shoe and the top piece there take another M3 by 16 if you've got them, although I will use M3 by 12 here because I have way too many of those and not enough M3 by 16, but use M3 by 16 ideally, although you can get away with M2 by 12. Same for that cap piece that goes onto the grip. And later on, once I'm done with it, I'll go again all the other screw locations on the actual parts, since you're not going to see me installing most of them anyway. Last section that I've got to go over before I start building some things is the 4x5 section. Very straightforward. You're going to clean up all that area. That's where the rangefinder locks into. You're going to clean up all this, add your magnets. Again, now remember this section now matches up with the A section, not the B section, because the B section is incorporated. Let's see, that is what that is, except it's just more space on the inside because of this interlock here, it blocks the image, it crops the image from top to bottom, so that's why over here it's much thinner. It's about up to right there, the bottom of the magnet, so it would not have been able to light seal properly if I wanted to redesign this section to work with just this back third here. It just would not have worked out, unfortunately. So that's the only drawback. You have a much bigger 4x5 section, but it's not going to be a lot of people that want this. It's very specifically a few people that are crazy enough to want to do it with this way, but it should be fun. It's just going to be a tight fit. Your cheek is going to be uncomfortable getting into the rangefinder, but I did not want to throw off the balance with the other smaller pieces just for accommodating this piece. There is a little bit of a price that you will pay for 4x5 Big Shot. Anyway, this is a section that goes like so. You'll have your tripod socket down at the bottom. Here is a loop for a strap. This is just a 4x5 Graflok clone. Takes your two tabs. These are installed with these other screws that are here. So there's a 3-part component to this. the screw itself, but also there's a lock washer and a normal washer. And with most washers that I see, whether you get them from McMaster or China, or even some of the McMaster ones come from China, they always have, since these are punched out, I think, they always have a rough side that you could see has some rough edges and a very rounded, smooth side. So you always want the rounded, smooth side to be touching the plastic, right? So that it glides, these will glide back and forth properly. If you wanted to use nylon washers, perfect if you got those. I buy tons of these for a bunch of other things, so I didn't want to buy just nylon washers for whenever I'm making the few 4x5 locks that I make. But if you've got nylon washers, or you want to make some sort of washers that are, I guess, self-lubricating washers, I should make washers out of HIPS. This is a high impact polystyrene, because I feel like that material, once it's sanded, it's very nice and slippery. So, but that's up to you. But if you're going to use those washers, make sure that the smooth side is touching the plastic. And yeah, now these tabs have a little indentation only on one side, meant for when you're using the spring backs. So the spring backs will come over here. They'll come into this channel and they'll lock onto these hooks. And then the metal bar will rest over this channel here. And that's pretty much it. And there. Screws there. Tri-pocket socket there. 2 magnets there. There's not a whole lot to this section. So yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and put it together, and let's see if I can do another calibration video and show you what I'm doing to calibrate these days. It's not much different than what I was doing before, but I figure it's worth recording the experience on this sort of system. Didn't manage to record this area properly, but let me just explain what I did here. So the first thing I did to start the installation process was to assemble all of this part of the camera together. So that means attaching the lock tabs to the front standard, and then attaching the front standard to the A piece. So the A section, as you saw earlier, takes 4 nuts. Always make sure that you pre-drill those holes, and then with the bent tweezers go in there and clear out those holes from any debris. And then you can install the front standard to the A piece using the 4 M2x16 screws. I used M2x12, but I would use M2x16. Alright, and then the lock tabs, now those take some special attention for the lock area where those knurled thumb screws are. So there's something that you've got to do there, and that is don't drill that hole, because then that knurled thumb screw will be too loose. You want to screw in any other longer M2 screw, and then with your drill keep going so that it kind of bottoms out and then keeps going and eats out a little bit. So it almost does the same thing as if you were drilling it out, except it still leaves some material in there, so that when you go in and then you fit your knurled thumb screw, then it will go ahead and have some sort of bite. And if it doesn't, if it's too loose, then add some of the weaker thread locker. I forget what color it is, the one that you can use that will still allow you some rotation, but will otherwise hold tight in there without unscrewing itself. Let's put together the rangefinder. So I've already started assembling this piece here. So this part has been glued onto the body, the mount to the body. All right, super glued. And then you see deep down inside the 2 screws that have been installed all the way through into there. So make sure that the path is clear. Let's see if you could see some sort of reflection. You can see that. Make sure that the screws do not go into the channel there, because if not, these won't be able to slide in all the way. And that's how you'll know. Actually, this goes this way. That's how you'll know. It should be that one there, and then this one in the bottom. So if in this case it needs to be opened up, we'll open up so that this fits perfectly. But yeah, let's get started putting that together. A few pieces that weren't in the first run through. This is the original viewfinder piece that went in here in this top part to mask the big roid. But now, you know, it's just, because it's multi-format, it's just one universal frame instead of the smaller Polaroid. But I still use this piece to create a center target on the Mylar. So we'll cut this Mylar. This is from a piece of Polaroid film. And what I did is I did a transparency, black and white transparency, or it was actually a failed black and white frame. So I waited a few minutes to do the transparency, and I washed off as much of the white as I could. I didn't do a perfect job here because I'm just illustrating it to you, but later on I'll go and wash this off better for my final product here. But just for the sake of demonstration, I'm probably going to use this corner here, which is about the cleanest. Basically cut it to that same size, and inside of the middle there, use something like a red Sharpie or a black Sharpie, doesn't matter, and then make your square there. So when you're done marking the Mylar, you'll see the red target there that I've drawn. And then I'll put the frame on here, and this should be like a press-on fit. This one's a little loose, so I'll probably reprint it. And I think I'm going to design the frame to be a little bit thinner now that I see. I forgot that I need to account for the 4x5 now, so this is originally about the Instax size, more or less. So yeah, but anyway, if you had a tight-fitting piece there, you'd put your Mylar in there. You'd put that in there. If it doesn't look perfectly centered, don't worry about it, because you're going to be manually calibrating everything anyway to match your ground glass later on. So this part of it doesn't have to be super perfectly centered. Okay, because we can rotate this around on the pivot. All right, so I'm gonna go finish putting this together. And yeah, let's start off with we got the main body here. We're gonna attach the top and the bottom. So you've got the opening here, the eyepiece section in the back, and then this one, nothing here, just the opening there. We'll go right there. We'll put this piece to the side. We're not using it at the moment. And we'll put this back on when we're ready to calibrate. We've got our mirrors, our pivots. We got our tubes here. I didn't have these two in the previous walkthrough of the printed parts, but this is the eyepiece. I usually print it out of TPU, so it's nice and rubbery. And when you're all done, these will go back here, and then you can move this around too if you need to, if for some reason things aren't looking quite centered, or just if you're taller or shorter. There's a lot of things that can cause and influence you needing to change this window. So anyway, it's like that. It's bigger here just so you can always get your finger to move the mirror up and down to adjust it from this side in an emergency if you need to. But yeah, normally you'd pop that and then glue that in there. And then this was the original Instax wide one, but you can use the square one. I mean, it's up to you. You decide what's comfortable for your perspective. But these will be finishing items that go on till the very end anyway, so I just wanted to mention them so that you know what they are. All right, so before we glue the tubes on there, we need to put in the mirrors and the pivots. So this is where the glue stick comes in handy. Now, if you got lucky, normally there's some overhangs in the little indentations you see deep down inside there, the indentations of the circle of where the pivot discs go. So normally if there's some overhanging in there, then it'll make it so that these kind of fit in there and they snap on and they don't fall out. So I got kind of lucky there too. That one holds pretty okay. Sometimes it's not entirely perfect, so it doesn't hold in there too well, but well, just enough. But in times where it doesn't hold, I think one of these didn't hold well. Yeah, that one doesn't hold well. See, so we won't want to add some glue stick. Now, if you don't want to do that, another trick that you could do is you at least start off, use the gravity to your advantage. So put this face down like that, and you start off with the first one. Now, the orientation for all these discs is you see that little square or rectangle at the top. That on the bottom, those should always be facing north, upward. So this is the bottom piece. So you see, like, it's like that. This is the top, this is the bottom of the camera. So the disc should be in here facing up like that, right? And then similarly, in this one, you got the opening in there, the circle here, this opening is the bottom, that's the top. So these discs need to go in there like so, with that notch facing north, all right? Upward to the sky. Okay, so the trick to them is, if you get at least one and you want the slots to be straight, going out like that. So let's put one of them in there. All right. Oop, it's getting a little bit loose, so it doesn't quite hold on this piece. So I'm gonna put my thumb in here and then hold it. I'm holding it with my thumb inside of that hole there. And I'm gonna slide this other piece in there and feed it and use the other side of my thumb to kind of hold it in there. So my thumb is acting kind of like a mirror, I guess. But you see I'm holding it in place with my thumb on both sides. And then you'd slide the mirror in through there. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now off camera, and then we'll come back. And then always make sure if the mirrors don't go through here, then you'll need to sand them down, which it looks like that's gonna be the case for me right now. So I'll go ahead and do that. Oh, that one goes in perfectly, so we'll probably start off with that one. So I'm gonna go clean up my mirrors, come right back. But yeah, that's essentially how you do it, the bottom. So they need to go this way. So we'll put that one in first. I'm gonna hold it with my thumb there. And then with this other one, remember, it needs to be facing that way, so I'm gonna flip it this way. I'm gonna slide it in there underneath my thumb. Sometimes it takes a little bit of jiggling, wiggling your thumb so that it tries to press against both walls at the same time. See, my thumb is at an angle, so the tip of the thumb is holding up there, and then the bottom of the thumb is holding down there. All right, so once they're aligned, that's when you start passing through the mirror all the way through, and then you push it. See, once you're that far in, you can let go and it's already started, and you just push the mirror all the way through. See? So that's the easiest way to do it. Yeah, this one I got lucky. They hold in there because of the print. This one not so lucky, so I had to hold it in there with my thumb. So that's pretty much what you'll deal with. Don't worry about it. That's how you can make it easier on yourself. If that's still, you don't have that kind of dexterity, then that's when you do something like, you know, just coat the back a little bit with some glue. You know, and this glue isn't gonna dry very soon. You know, isn't gonna harden or anything very soon. And then once you're done with it, over time it will dry. But you're just using it for its tackiness. See? It's holding in there, and you'll still be able to pop your mirrors in there. All right, so again, let me put it together, and then I'll come back and show you what everything looks like. Oh, just one word. The mirrored orientation, I usually want the first surface side, which if you put your finger on it, you'll see that your finger touches your finger. That's the first surface side. The other side, you'll see if you touch there, there's a gap between your finger and the reflection of your finger, because your finger is being reflected on the backing over here on the reflective side, on this side, through the clear acrylic over here, because this is the mirror side on both sides. This front face is just clear, so that's how you know. First surface. And the reason why is the first surface scratches very easily on these cheap acrylic mirrors, so you want them to be like if on the bottom piece here with no eyepiece side on the back side, you want your first surface side to be facing down, so that when your mirror rotates, it's going to be like this, and the first surface side, it's hidden, and the image is coming in and then bouncing off of the first surface side and then up to the top. So again, first surface, put your finger and you'll be able to touch your finger through it. That side should be facing down, and then this side should be facing up, where there's a gap between your finger and the reflection of your finger. All right, same thing for over here with the eyepiece section. So this is the top, this is the bottom. You're going to want first surface side to be facing down, so that when you rotate this mirror this way, because they're both going to be rotating at the same angle. People think that this one goes that way. It does not. It goes this way. So they're both like that. And then the first surface side is hidden. That way, when you're moving it around, you're going to be touching this side. You won't scratch it as much. Even me just wiping it with a microfiber towel, just because there was a little bit of dust on there, I already kind of lightly scratched it. So if you do have a scratched up side out of the two mirrors, put the most scratched up first surface side at the bottom, because that's not going to reflect anywhere. It's this side that's going to reflect up into the viewfinder that you'll see with your eyes. And if you put it up here, your eyes might be able to see, even though you'll be looking through that. As your eyes focus, you'll probably see some of the scratches and it'll annoy you. So always put your least perfect mirror on the bottom, your most perfect mirror up top, and you'll notice imperfections a lot less. Now my mirrors are in both sides, the top side, and I don't have them angled all the way, but as you put them in there, try to move them back and forth in the pivots so that they are kind of like steep a little bit, but you won't go back that far. You'll probably end up somewhere, near 45, and then once you have them adjusted in there, then bring them back to a little bit like that. That way when you start calibrating, all you're doing is pressing down little by little until they get to the sweet spot, instead of then having to figure out a way to lift it. If that ever happens, you'll have to use something like your curled tweezers to kind of carefully lift it back up, or pull it back down here from this back side if you can reach in there. Yeah, so that's how you have to do it. That's why I prefer leaving it at a default like that, relatively flat, not flat all the way, because I did push it back a little bit, so now it's colliding there, so it won't go flat, so that's fine. And then we'll do like so when we're ready to calibrate it. And then this one, the same thing. And make sure that the mirror right now is like this at this angle. It'll ultimately angle up a little bit more, but for now let's just leave it relatively flat as well. And then when we're ready to adjust, we'll just, again, same thing here, is press it down in light increments. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to glue the tubes together. So this is the top tube. Now you see in here I already added the green rangefinder patch, so that's how you would do it. You glue your patch or material to that piece, and then that piece gets glued inside of the bottom of that tube. Okay, so now it's time to glue these onto there. So you do not want to put too much glue, because then the vapors will go inside and then attack your mirror, and then it might leave ugly blemishes that you could see through your viewfinder. So first, check your fitment, make sure that it's nice and round all the way around, and then we'll just add a little couple beads of glue. This is just to hold it, to pivot it, so it's not something that needs to be super tight on there, because you're eventually going to glue this surface to here once we're calibrating. So again, rangefinder out there, move it a little bit around so it gets wet, and then hold it, and then wait for it to dry. If you want to put a clamp on it, you could. You don't absolutely need to. I think that's enough for me. Make sure that it's drying. And if you don't want it to bloom into and fog up the mirror, then probably put this in front of a fan or some sort of air source that is either pulling the fumes or pushing the fumes away, and then keeping this dry. So I'll probably go ahead and do that. And I'm going to put that in my little fan down below. And then now I'm going to do this side as well. This side, there's no, on this bottom side, there's no orientation specifically. You can do either side. I prefer doing the angled side being on the glue side, but it doesn't really matter. Same here, we will add 1, 2, 3, 4. That one had a little bit too much there, so I'm gonna wipe that off slightly. Yeah, because the more glue you have, the more risk of fogging up your mirror. So I'm gonna move that around to spread it, and I'm gonna hold it. And again, the function of these tubes really is only to act as a pivot for this part here, like so. Okay, so we're gonna put that down here to dry, off camera. And yeah, we'll get to the rest. So again, keep these to the side because on the other side of the mirror, once we glue the pivot wheels in place so that they no longer move up and down, so that you don't bump it and then shift it or whatever, we are going to add a little bit of glue, and there might be some fogging in there too. So on the top side, we can remove these afterwards. So we'll place these on the top side of the mirrors afterwards, after we're calibrated. These screws back here are completely optional. I have left them on there just so that I don't have the empty holes, but they're on there super loose, and you'd only want to tighten them slowly so that there's a little bit of friction, but there's still, you know, smooth rotation, because you're gonna be, when you're adjusting, you're gonna be moving in small increments. So keep that in mind here, okay? Very important that you're able to move in small increments and that it stays put without wobbling around, okay? All right, same down here. You should be able to do this. Okay, now the channel in there, if you are using the screw to tighten it up in there, then the channel is gonna block the screw if you have it in too much. So you will have to back it out enough to move it up here, because what will happen, I'll explain it again when we're calibrating, but what will happen is once we have the proper alignment, then you'll move it back up, and you'll make your marks. With this thing, you'll add a little bit of glue on the inside, you know, in some important points, all 4 sides, and then quickly put it down and then adjust it again while you're looking through, and then let it dry. And then do the bottom one. I actually do this one first, and then that one, because this one you just need to worry about the bottom. But here is where you also need to make sure that the aim is perfect and the framing, because this only controls the focus of the image. So even if this bottom one was out of alignment, I guess you could say, you could still tell if it's in focus on one axis, on the focus axis. So this side here, not as important so much, because even if that image was offset, you're in focus when it does this, right? Like here, like my thumbs, you're in focus when they align. You know, so normally it'd be like you're in focus right here where they're overlapping. If that bottom one is off, it'll be more like that, but you'll still know you're in focus because they'll line up like that, right on this axis. And then for the glue, I like this glue because it's not too fast acting, because if it is really instant, then you're not gonna have enough time to adjust it around, and you are gonna need to split it, break it apart somehow. So that's why I like only adding drops of glue, because, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 drops of glue is enough to keep it still, and it's not going to move even if you bump it lightly. Obviously, if the camera falls, it's a plastic camera, so, you know, a bunch of other things are going to go wrong anyway, so you can't really want to glue it too strongly. It needs to be glued on enough so that it no longer moves. And with only 1, 2, 3, 4 beads of glue, you know, if you ever did end up needing to, then you can at least use like a knife, you know, or a thinner, some sort of like razor blade here to just pop it in there, you know, and then wedge it in there and try to pop this back off, right, if you need to redo. So I've done that a few times before. It is a little bit risky, but that's why you don't add too much glue when you're gonna be making the change permanent. So at this point, I've got it assembled as far as you need to bring it so that you can calibrate it, or at least check if you need to make any changes to the lens board, or if it's just not to your liking, you need to make changes to elongate any of the sections as you wish to get your desired framing and composition. But at least for my next step is at least to see if my starting point is the accurate one. I will mention I totally forgot that for this build I'm using a Copal 1 lens. So because of the Copal 1, this will get in the way of the lock. So it's got to clear if you want to change the f-stop. So I'll show you, talk through a little bit of things that you need to keep in mind up here in a moment. But this is a different lens board than I showed you earlier. I showed you this one. This would be what you'd use, at least this style. This is a hole for a Copal 1, but this style would be for the Copal 0 because the Copal 0 lenses usually don't need even an offset lens board like that. They're fine with just this configuration here. And I think there's only really like 3 lenses that you'll really find these days that are Copal 0 that'll fit here. And that's I think the Ektar, they have a 203 millimeter. There's a 190 millimeter Nikon, and then I like using the 210 Repro Claron Schneider. So those are the 3 small lenses that I recommend for the system. But otherwise, you're going to be using either the Xenar here or the Geranar or the G Claron. Those are my 3 top recommendations for the 210 millimeter range. All right, so we got it on the proper lens board, but either way, this lens board is not the right fit here. We'll see how that works there, because even if I close it up here, this collides with the lock there, as you can see. So, but I'm not going to use that lock. I'm just showing it to you. If you wanted to use that lock, there's another lens board that brings it out further, but then that might be a little bit zoomed into your liking. And it will be probably a lot closer to the Big Shot. There's some room left so that you get a lot closer to that exact Big Shot proportion. But again, I like zooming it back a little bit because I like a lot more inside of my frame, and especially with the Instax wide, I think you'll probably agree that that exact same proportion is just going to be too cut off, really, because of the weird Instax wide ratio. So back to this here. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm not necessarily wanting to move this lens from here to like other cameras, included in the files are lens board files for the Speed Graphic, the Pacemaker version. I forget what lens board that is. And then for the Intrepid 8x10. So you'll be able to use, if your lens covers 8x10, you'll be able to just pop it on there. I know the G Claron does, so that's the lens that I'm going to use on my personal build. So that's why I have that, so I can go back and forth and use it as my landscape lens on the Intrepid, and then put it on the big wide, and then use it, or the big T, and then use it as my portrait lens. Anyway, back to here. I think I mentioned it a few times, but always be careful when you're screwing in these 4 screws. You can easily make it so that you strip the nuts, and the nuts are just spinning around freely, and then you have to reprint basically this section, the front centered, and then the A piece all over again if you can't somehow save it and get it out of there, or have enough space to, like, you know, get a cutting wheel in there to cut the screw without damaging the plastic. So that's happened to me a few times. Try not to use the drill, the powered screwdriver here. These 4 screws should be the only screws that you actually do by hand with a hand screwdriver, so that you could feel the moment you get too much resistance where it's going to get stuck. Just back it out, take this out, check if there's any debris stuck in there, switch the nut out to a different nut, because sometimes these Chinese nuts get really messed up, so, or they're not entirely perfect tolerance wise. So yeah, don't risk it, just hand tighten those and you will be fine. Since I'm not going to be moving, or at least this build is not intended to keep moving this lens around, if this ends up being the right offset and I don't have to move it out further, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to omit the lock, at least omit the top lock, and then just, I'm going to do that already right now anyway, so it's easier for me to move around. And then I'm just going to, you know, tighten these here, and this one I will lock at the bottom, but at least this top one. And this is what you could do too, right? You don't have to, these don't have to be live locks. You just have the option to remove it. You could do the same thing here, is just make it a permanent or semi-permanent lock, right? Tightened as much as possible. And this one, it's already locked in there. So this one I don't need to tighten down because this one can keep the lock. And then sometimes something you can do is, if your lens allows for it, you can still use it in this configuration and lock it, but you use it like that. So you kind of use this top one here on the top side as your a kind of a lip, and you tuck under it. So that's another option that you have if you want to do it that way. With the Fujinon and all those other lenses with the big elements in the back, that might not be easy to do. It'll touch right there, I think, so be careful when you're using those. All right, so let's see, there's no other words of warning that you need to know there. Right, that's nice and locked, it's not going to go anywhere. This lens board, this material, it's high impact polystyrene, so it does shrink a little bit, so it is wobbling around, but you don't want your lens board to be wobbling around. So when I reprint this, or I'll find a way to kind of keep it so that it's not wobbling around. Maybe I'll put some felt on the other side, or, you know, I don't know. I'll figure it out. But anyway, yeah. So we've got lens on the lens board, open it up. You don't need to put this yet. You don't need to put the magnets yet, because, you know, what if you need to reprint this section again? You do need the tripod socket down here, because we are going to put this on a tripod to mount it. And everything else is, you know, you got your magnets. Everything's good to go. And obviously we've got the rangefinder on there, and it's locked in place. So, and these should always be tightened so that it does take a little bit of wiggle to slide it in, and a little bit of wiggle, and maybe even a thumb press to slide it out so that it's on there firmly. And then you'll know that it's in there properly when you're able to lock it, okay? So that's how it goes. And these, again, should be free spinning, but not too much, right? They should have friction on them so you can adjust them when we're calibrating. And then lastly, we're gonna need a ground glass of some type. So I have my own here that I put on a Polaroid cartridge, and I've marked up with my framing so I can center it. And then I have some red marks there for the Go, where the Go frame is gonna be. So that's pretty much where I'm gonna want a head and neck portrait, maybe head, neck, and collar portrait. We'll see if the bigger portrait looks fine on the Polaroid. But yeah, let's go and start calibrating. And I will want to take with me, I'm not going to do the calibrating in this room. I have another setup with a target and a tripod, but I will bring with me the glue, screwdriver, just in case for the front lens or whatever if I need it. And then this, if I want to, well, you would need to bring it if you were using the set screws to create some friction for the rotation there. But if not, you don't need it, but I'm going to bring it with me anyway. So minimally, this is what you need, and your ability to check focus. All right, and that'll lock right there. I'll also bring out your eyepiece, because you're going to need to use that. In this configuration right now, I ended up just adding the patch already to the front with the new frame to hold it in. So I'm going to use the back to kind of push the mirror up into place, or stick my finger in there, and then take this in and out as I need it. It holds there in pretty nicely, so hopefully it doesn't fall on you too much. If not, use the glue stick trick to kind of hold that in. Just add a little bit of friction there, a little bit of extra area in their material. Even just adding a little bit of glue at the top there, glue stick, the residue will hold it in there pretty nicely. Because that's what you'll be using to center that square onto this square, and then onto your target. And you'll see what I mean once I start showing you through the viewfinder what you'll be looking at on the target. So now that it's all nice and locked in, and we're ready to go put it on a tripod and start calibrating. So we've got the big T set up out here on a tripod, and I've got a one light source aimed at the target. The target that you have access to does not have as much detail as mine does. I've just written a whole bunch of other stuff over time that's helped me with not just this camera, but a bunch of other cameras as well. So I highly recommend you do that, especially putting small marks. I like putting little pencil marks so that way I know if I could see the graphite down to the graphite texture down at the ground glass level, and I could see that from all the way over here, then that's going to be pretty sharp. That's usually how I go by that. And when you're writing stuff in marker too, there's always a little bit of you know, small little lines that feather off from the lettering that you can use to see is that little bit of edge of the lettering pretty sharp, and stuff like that. So you set up your target, you're going to set up your camera. A couple of things that you're going to need. Additionally, I've got a piece of ground glass here on a Polaroid cartridge. You're always going to want to make sure that that's pressed forward. So every time that you're measuring or checking things, press the cartridge forward and the ground glass forward so that you know that that is where it needs to be. And yeah, you know, align your stuff completely. I've done little dots on mine. The little red dots, if you can see them, are my Go frame. And there's another lower red dot that you can barely see at the edge of that black frame, because that's not quite the Polaroid frame. The dark edge that you see there, that's still a little bit more on the inside. I can't see it here, but you know, I always recommend putting in a sheet of Polaroid and then marking up your ground glass so that you know what the actual Polaroid dimension is. You know, or just tape or glue frame on top of your ground glass to make it look like a Polaroid print. Here I have included for reference an example of that same target I'm using but shot with an actual Big Shot and FP100C. Don't worry, this is not a full price pack of film. I managed to find a camera through Goodwill that had some very toasty FP100C in it. This one, I don't know what the color would have been. It was the very last frame, so I saved it just for this moment because I desperately needed this reference shot and I did not want to waste some precious FP100C. So here you can see it, you know, take a screenshot of it, print it out so you have the correct proportion of it. And yeah, hopefully it can be useful to you for calibration purposes. I'm also using a loop here. I took this off of an enlarger, but it works amazingly well for what I need. And then lastly, you're going to need, where did it go? Yes, some sort of laser measure. And then I usually measure from whatever starting point, either from any fixed starting point from the edge of the camera, you know, or the edge of the lens. Here we have a Xenar, so in theory, just about any Xenar that you measure from here in a Copal 1 of that generation should have the exact same measurement. But things may vary, so always measure again and keep your own notes. All right, so the first thing that we're gonna do once we have it on the tripod is we need to find out, based off of the lens board and the front that we chose up here, how much that sticks out. We decided what kind of framing we'd want, right? So the more in that is, the bigger the subject is going to be. The more out it is, actually the other way around. So the more outward it is, bigger the subject, and the more in it is, the smaller the subject. Here I want to start figuring out where is my sharpest point of focus. So I'm going to need to, with this whole rig on the tripod lens, move the tripod front and back. Now I got this on hardwood floors, so it's easy. This is going to be incredibly difficult on carpet. So use some sort of rollers or casters, or put the camera on a cart, or mount the tripod on a cart or something like that, or something with wheels that you can lock and roll back, because you're going to be basically going back and forth until you find the sweet spot. So first thing I do is I start off going as far forward as possible towards the target for where I think I'm going to be at. I think I'm supposed to be about 4 feet maybe. So we'll usually start there, maybe 3 feet to be on the safe side. And then as you're looking through the ground glass, you're pulling the camera, you're pushing it either forward or you're pulling it backward as you're looking in the ground glass until you see that your target is nice and sharp. I already did that here. I marked off my distances already, so I know where I'm supposed to be at. But just one word of advice: if you start off too forward, and then once you come back, take that measurement, right? You have to measure twice. You should measure twice minimally. You know that saying, measure twice, cut once? You know, there's measure 4 times here because obviously we're dealing with optics. So we want to be as accurate as possible. So I started up forward and I brought my camera back until I was in focus. And then I check my ground glass and then I write down that number, right? Now, my second measurement, I move the camera back some, and then I start moving the camera forward until it's right where my focus needs to be. And then I note that measurement. So in this case, for this camera, I ended up being 5.16 feet away at the short end, 5.26 feet away at the back end. That's a little bit long, and I'm doing that on purpose because, again, I want my Go frame to have more of that tighter portrait instead of just a face, a cross-section of a face. But if you wanted the Instax wide or the Polaroid framing to be very, very close to the Big Shot, then you're gonna want to change your lens board and all that. Make both of these bigger. Use the bigger version of the standard, or the mid version, this one, the mid or the tall version, and then use a thicker lens board here. Adjust that one outward so that, the longer the camera is, the more forward you'll be able to move. So the sweet spot for the Big Shot itself is about 38 to 42 inches, depending on what documentation you read. Either the engineer or the manual, people have said different things, but it's going to be somewhere in there between 38 inches and 42 inches is the sweet spot. We've got it dialed in at 5.21 because I'm going to go for the center of those two measurements. Because what I'm essentially saying is that if I'm 5.26 over here and 5.16, then I want my point to be somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to go and get the camera so that it's sitting at 5.21. Now we're ready to start calibrating the rangefinder itself. Make sure everything is locked down everywhere so that the tripod isn't moving anywhere. Check it constantly to make sure that you're still where you need to be. For my number, that was 5.20 I ended up deciding on. That's where it should be, 5.20 from the front element. From yours, it should be a little bit closer than that because I'm just doing something different with my build. But if you want that true Big Shot frame, again, 38 to 42 inches away you should be. So we'll need this piece, the viewfinder piece for the back. And you already see right there the framing, right? So essentially we want it from the back to look like this and be centered, and then center the focusing patch into that square itself. So that kind of acts as like an alignment function there. So we're gonna do that first. I wouldn't put on gloves because I do not want to put fingerprints on the mirror. You are going to be touching them for this step. You're going to be first, starting from the bottom. I like to make sure that I have the rangefinder patch. Actually, no, let's start from the top. I want to see that, make sure that the rangefinder patch is visible. So you start seeing it there. Angle the mirror so that it starts getting closer. So I'm going to go and put this on there. See, not quite yet. Right, so I still got to move it down a little bit more. So this is where this gets tricky. It's really hard to do one-handed because I'm holding a camera, but you get the gist of it. Right, and that's basically it. You keep doing that back and forth until you feel like you're adequately centered. Not quite there yet. I went too far. So now I gotta push it down the other way. And that's basically what you're gonna be doing, being very careful not to move the camera. It takes just fine touching. It doesn't take too much to move it away off base. All right, so let's go back here. Let's go closer actually. So we're almost there. So I'm gonna do the fine tuning, but while setting the camera down so I get this perfectly. But I think right here you get what I'm saying, right? You want to center that circle so that's center to the square and this frame in the back. So see how the alignment works? That's how you'll know when these three are aligned, centered, you know you're on the money. So that's what you're trying to do here, is align those things. And naturally, I already had this one straightened out, but you know, once you start looking at the target, here, let me focus that in there. Let me lock focus on that. And once you start looking back here, you'll realize, okay, I'm not fully center, right? I still need to move this thing back and forth. So that's basically what you're doing up here. So let me align this first, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like. Here we could see the green dot is about center of the target. Obviously I'm shaking around and trying to hold this steady, but now we'll see what happens when we take it off. And in theory, the square should be centered too. And it is. You see that? But you see how I'm moving around, how it's moving off square centered? So really, you don't need the back piece to compose perfectly. You just need those two things. So to align is that circle and that square. So if you're square in the middle, you see the circle is right on the circle, the center circle of the target. Just wanted to mention real quick to always use your right eye when calibrating, since that is the eye that you're going to be composing with because of how the body is constructed. Now that you've got that done, now we're going to start moving the bottom. One word of warning here that I was running into is this part is too tight for me, so when I'm moving it around, it's chattering a little bit. So you usually don't want it to be too tight, because it has to be very buttery smooth so you can get nice incremental movements. Because now I'm not going to want to pop that off to glue it and then pop it in and then try to quickly realign it again. It's just going to be too difficult. So I think what this build will end up doing is I won't lift it up to glue it. I think I'm just going to glue it around the outside. Yeah, I'll probably glue it around the edges around here and in the back, and then see if it gets into those creases and it stays glued in. Maybe add a little bit of glue wherever I can in any creases all the way around carefully, so it's not too sloppy. So, but yeah, you do ideally want it to be nice and buttery smooth so that you don't run into that problem. And you can quickly lift it up, glue the inside, set it back down, and then quickly realign it again once you know roughly it's where it needs to be. Okay, so now we're going to do the bottom part. So again, what we did here, just to recap on this top part, I moved it side to center the square. Then I moved the mirror up and down to center the focusing patch right there. Okay, so you're going to do those two things: is move that left and right, and then move the mirror up and down. All right, so once we're done there and we're pretty much ready to go, we'll work with the bottom. So the bottom, the first thing that I like doing is, while I'm looking through the top, is I'll stick my finger up in through the front, and I'll feel around for the mirror. You can see my finger poking up, and I'm slowly going to start pushing it down. Remember, the mirror started level pretty much almost, so I'm going to be pushing it down until I can see I went too far. And what I'm doing here is just moving this left and right so that I can get an image properly centered. But you will want to move the mirror down a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and start moving it until I get a pretty much close to center image. Just going to take some adjustment. Keep pushing the mirror, and there you go. It's almost there. Right about there. Okay. And I'm not quite center on the left and right, so I'm going to be moving that. But here you can see is where that chatter is making it, so I don't have very fine movement. See, and it wasn't even in all the way. So this is definitely a two-handed job. So I'm going to go and put the phone down, but that's the name of the game here. If you could see what's happening is now I'm moving the left and the right so that the center patch aligns. So you're moving, that's what this controls. The bottom controls the focus patch, and what you see within the focus patch, the top controls basically your composition, your center square, and all that. So what you see of your subject. All right, so let me fix that and we'll come right back. So yeah, this is really where you earn your keep on this build, because it is a little bit tricky, especially that you have to then glue it too. So that's always a tricky part, is then coming back to it. But if it was loose enough so that you have enough time to pop it out, glue it, pop it back in, and then readjust it, then this is where here on the back, you would put, I put one pencil mark on this side, one pencil mark on that side, or sometimes a little blade, just a score line with a blade, somewhere maybe on this side where it's not too visible. So I know that I got to match up those 2 points quickly. If I don't want to be like, while I'm looking at it, moving it, because you have a limited amount of time. So that's probably what I am going to try to do right now. I don't know, I'm not sure yet. I don't like how much chatter there is. It is a little bit too tight on this build. We'll see, maybe I might add a little bit of grease in there and then recalibrate to see if that helps. But if not, maybe I'll just glue the outside if I can get enough glue and capillary effect into the body. So hopefully that works. But yeah, this is where you would want to carefully either glue it here or carefully take the camera elsewhere without bumping into anything, without making too many drastic movements. And then not only glue the camera down, the pieces, this piece and that piece, glue it to the body, but also on the inside of the mirror pivots. I'll show you once I have it off the camera where to glue the discs, but just very small beads of glue in there so that it doesn't fog everything up in there. But we'll do that step in a moment. All right, so I've glued all the way around. I did not risk it and try to pull it up and then glue it down. But this isn't really that much better either, because you always hit the glue out there and it doesn't look perfect. But we'll do what we can. But yeah, ideally you want a slower setting glue. And then another thing that I've done is I've added, if you could see in there on top of the discs, a few dabs. And then very carefully, I'd layered back over there a piece of plastic. So I'm gonna do it over here so you can see how I do it. Is just carefully drop it in there, and then hopefully the static will take care of the rest. You don't want to touch the mirror in there and then risk moving it. So that should at least prevent any fog buildup if you have the kind of glue that fogs up. This one is pretty good about it. Every now and then it does bloom a little if I put too much, but as long as I put a few drops and there's good ventilation in here, I'm gonna throw the fans on right now just to keep air circulating and we should be good. Then we'll come back and check it all out when it's all dry, put it back on the tripod and see if hopefully nothing moved out of place. And now we are all finished up. I've got everything put in there, the patch, the framing, and I don't glue the frames in. I make sure that they're press fit nice and tight so that they're holding the Mylar in, and then I could remove and then replace because they're gonna get scratched up over time. As a matter of fact, I dropped that one a few times, and the Polaroid Mylar scratches easily. If you could find something that is more scratch resistant, that's fine. But once it's on here, typically you're not gonna be touching it with your fingers very often, unless it's accidental. So yeah, that's a bit of, we'll finish getting the camera ready. But for now, let's go put it back on the tripod and see if anything moved out of the way. We got our target over there. Now let's come over here and let's try to align the target to the center there. All right, we're pretty good still. Okay, it's not always gonna be perfect because you can see even moving around it moves around, so it's okay. You're gonna be within a few millimeters around the side. It's not gonna be a very bad framing like this, like very extreme. Because even then, if that was a body over there, and then that square, that middle rectangle was a face, you still have the face in the frame with all this much movement. So in case you did mess something up, then my best recommendation is just if you've already glued everything together and you don't want to reprint everything and redo this all over, then at least try redrawing the square. So if like ended up over here, well then, it was something like that, then we'll just redraw the square on the Mylar and then move it up into the side so that it kind of realigns. So that's another trick that you could do. But then obviously back here, you're not going to be very accurate, right? So you may be looking at it this way, but then you redraw your square so that it's more to the left there. So when you're looking into the viewfinder, it's going to look crooked, but at least your target there will be on point. All right, so I'm going to go and make a different frame here, just a bigger one, because now that we have 4x5, we need to be able to see the maximum area. I don't think this full coverage all the way around that you see is actually 4x5. we'll see right now. Once I finish the back part for the 4x5, I'll put it on the ground glass and we'll see how much coverage we get on there. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the calibration. Once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. But again, just rewatch this video a few times so you understand what I'm doing, so you're not making any mistakes. And at the very least, if you do make a mistake, then at least you just have to reprint the rangefinder part now that it comes off of there. And we are back, all assembled and ready to go, ready to walk through everything one more time. So I assembled these two pieces off camera, but they're pretty straightforward. With the 4x5 piece, it's just the 2 screws here and the 2 screws here. And remember that you always want to have a lock washer and a normal washer up in there so that things could be pretty tight, but not too tight, and still a little springy, because as most of you know, or a lot of you know, 4x5 backs do not have a very universal distance for the lock channel. So some of them, that's why these come at an angle so that it can help pinch the back down. So anyway, and then tripod here, socket here that you'll need to calibrate, and then your 2 magnets there. That's about it. And again, this section combines the 4x5 with this part only because it needs to be wider open on the inside. This one, as you can see, has got some baffling in there, and then to make room for the magnets, I have to bring in the walls a little bit. So much thinner walls on this one, deeper in. All right. And then the Lomograflok section is here on this side. And this is the orientation that you'll normally use it in, facing this way with the ejection coming out the side and this part facing up. The lock over here, I'll show you how to use that in a moment. We've got our very front A section with the front standard and lens board in there with our lens. So one thing that you can do actually with the Copal lenses is if you did need to use a smaller board, which I did here, it would block off the lock there. I removed the lock because I don't like it up there. But now at least I angled the lens so that the release is still on this side, so I can still, activate it with my thumb, similar, just about in the same location where the Big Shot is. So I could still attack it there. But at the same time, if I needed to go wide, all the way closed down, then I stop there, then I'll stop short of where the lock normally is. So you'll have clearance there, so you don't have to worry about having to go much further that way. So little tip there, if you need to go lower and you can't clear the lock. So little tip. I have not yet flocked everything, so that's probably the last step left for me, is to flock everything with the nice flat black. I'll probably do 2 coats, 3 coats on this side. I'm going to remove these felt strips here. That I added these just so that it doesn't wobble in there. If sometimes your print is too small, I didn't want to reprint it because I'm running very low on this material, and it's a very nice, expensive HIPS material. But I'm going to give this one a good 3 to 4 coats because this material is super translucent. It's not very light tight. The carbon fiber materials in general are light tight, so that's what I love about them, is not only do they print great, but they're light tight. So I'm just going to give them a 1 coat on the inside strictly for reflections. They don't need any light sealing. But if there were any thin spots for some whatever reason, which I don't think so, these are pretty beefy pieces, then just 1 coat of black 1.0 or black 2.0 has you covered right there. Okay, so let me walk you through the hardware one more time, because I know in the first section when I went over everything on the black mat, I had a bunch of screws everywhere and it wasn't really clear what we were using. I also changed things up for this build because I was low on some other screws, so I think it's fair to walk through exactly what you will need. So let's start off with the front section. So the front standard here, we'll take these 4 screws are M2 by 8, preferably cross, preferably rounded head. It doesn't need to be rounded head, could be countersink if you'd like. You can mess around with different screws there. But as long as they're an M2 by 8, And then you've already seen by now what it could potentially interfere with, which is not a whole lot, right? So again, M2x8. These also have M2 washers and M2 lock washers, so that we can have mobility, but still some, oh, this one's locked, but some mobility while still having some downward pressure and a little bit of spring in case some of our lens boards are a little too fat. All right, now the 4 screws to hold the front standard in are supposed to be M2x16. I used M2x12, which you can do, but using M2x16 is recommended just so they go a little bit deeper, gives you a little bit of peace of mind. But at least on M2x12, the edge of the screw does clear the other side of the nut, so it does screw into the nut fully and a little bit more. So, but I like having much longer screws just for peace of mind. But that one, M2x12, you should not have any problems at all. All right, so again, for M2x16 or M2x12 at a worst case scenario, and they're M2 nuts that go underneath in this piece. All right, up here, I finally put in the magnets for the diffuser screen holder. Now, you do not need to add the magnets until the end because you always run the risk of having to reprint the front standard, or just, you know, you might decide to make it a little bit bigger or make a change. So once you've calibrated everything, once you're ready to start the finishing process, that's when you add these magnets here, and on the diffuser frame, these magnets here. All right, and this just pops right on just like that. All right, takes 3 business card size Fresnels. For me, that's given me the nicest look so far, and while diffusing it, finally put on our cold shoe there for the flash. Usually it'll be somewhere towards the back for the Vivitar 252. If you use a Magic Cube or Flash Cube adapter, you'll probably need to move it forward a little bit so it looks a little bit nicer so that the flash is much closer to the diffuser. And these are M2x8 screws with M2 nuts. No washers, nothing else, just the 2 screws and the 2 nuts. All right, on this side, we've got our 2 long magnets, and that's about it. So this is the, again, the A section, front standard, diffuser frame, and the locks right here. Now let's move on to the B section. This is the B section over here. Not much here except for a tripod socket at the bottom, and then 1-2 magnet up here, 1-2 magnet up here. Again, remember from earlier, make sure you're keeping track of the polarity of each magnet so that you don't have any issues mating, you know, one section to the other. As for the breakdown of the rangefinder, it takes M3x8 countersunk screws right there. These screws that attach the mount section to the body here are M3x16. An M2x8 screw holds in the lock. These are M2x8 screws as well. And there's nuts on the inside of these. There's no nuts on the inside of these. The M3s do take a nut on the inside. All right, you've got to assemble this onto this before you put these on, okay? That's it for the hardware on the rangefinder handle. And then from there, we go to our back sections. So our back sections are as follows. We've got the back section for the MRBP, my Polaroid RB67 back that is compatible with this system. So you can just buy one back for your camera, your RB67, and then make the rest or buy the rest, and then you'll have a pretty versatile system, okay? Comes apart like so. Has a lock over here to lock it in place so it doesn't go anywhere. Our 2 magnets in front. If you wanted to put a loop for a strap down here, that would go down here. And there's not much else on the back, right? This is the area for the rangefinder. Rangefinder can go in all 3 of these. And the rangefinder maintains its relative position, so you calibrate it for one format and it'll work for all the others, okay? So because they're all they're all been placed at the same film plane. So one rangefinder for all three. The difference in format is just the crop, essentially. So you got your Go, your Polaroid, your Instax wide, your 4x5. Basically, choose your format based off of the composition that you want to accomplish. All right, next up, we've got the Lomograflok section. Actually, let's leave that one for last because I want to go over how to take it apart and put it together or install the back. If you have not seen the Ligero LG video, I'll show you how to do that in a moment. We'll put the Polaroid section right there. So the 4x5 back, 2 M2 by 12 screws on each side, with also a washer and a lock washer to keep things semi-okay, tight and springy. Tripod socket down there, the 2 magnets there. The 4x5 section has some channels all the way around. Now, it light seals pretty okay, but if you feel like you need extra light sealing, or once you install it, you realize like maybe your back or your print is not fully flat, then you can add felt all the way around. Felt or yarn or whatever you want to do to add a light seal all the way around in that channel. Now finally for the big wide section, or the Instax wide section, you've got your magnets. Then you've got, here are M2 by 12 screws, and behind the foam there's 2 slots for the M2 nuts. This section here with the locks is the only area where I do not pre-drill the holes, because I do want the holes to be there nice and tight. If you did accidentally pre-drill the holes, and add some sort of thread locker, but this lock especially needs thread locker if it's not going to be nice and tight in there, because they do tend to back out and then eventually get way too loose. Okay, so that is that section. Let's see here on this side. We've got M3 by, I believe those are 24 screws, M3 by 24 or M3 by 28. I don't remember, but I do believe 20 does fit, but I like them to be longer, because if they're too short and they barely bite where the nut is, which is right below here somewhere, then it wobbles too much. So I want the screw to be long enough so that kind of helps prevent any sort of wobbling. All right, you should only install those. I like to tighten them down when it's fully open first, and I don't tighten them down all the way, okay? I mean, you want to bottom them out lightly, but then lift them back up so that it's got just a little bit of friction there, okay? On the top side here is an M2 by 12 will go to hold this top piece to the grip. And then these up here are going to be preferably M2 by 16 screws. You can get away with M2 by 12. I did here. This one you get away with M2 by 12 for sure. But these I just like to have M2 by 16. I don't think it'll be a problem with 12. They do go through the nut all the way and then clear a little bit on the other side. But again, I always like using longer screws just for peace of mind. And then this foam on this piece here in the back is 1.5 millimeter foam. You want to make sure that you are using 1.5 millimeter here, not 2 millimeter, so that you don't interfere too much with the film plane. And then you have enough foamy here to create a light seal all the way around your Lomograflok back. Let's see if I can think of anything else for the hardware. Nope, that's about it for the hardware. Not too hardware intensive. Yeah, like I said, these do take nuts behind the foam on this side. So the Lomograflok back. So the way that installs is this grip holds it from the bottom. This lock locks it over on this side. And then underneath here, it goes into a lip there. If you can see right up in there. All right, so the way you install this is as follows. If you uninstall it, I like pushing right here so that it frees it up over there. Then you can do this here, and that unlocks it, and then push it out there. And then you pop it, you pop it open like that, like a butter, like angled out. Okay, so it has to angle in. All right, and now you see this groove here, this channel. that aligns with this section right here. Right, so I'll show you. You see? Right there. And then you press and press. Okay, press these two because you want that to be all the way in there, okay, inside of the channel. Press, press, turn it around, press down here, and that should lock it there. Turn it over here, push this, you can angle it, push it over, and then push it down. See? Angle it because of this, needs to clear down there. See? And then that's locked. Okay, again, unlock. All right. Then put it together. Align it, press, press. Catch that. Press here, and then downward. Okay? Please try not to install any of the backs while the camera's fully assembled, or at the very least while you have the lens section on, or at the very least do it on top of a table or on top of something soft. Don't do it up in midair because something could fly off. It is a very delicate system. It's not designed, again, to be used and abused and carried around like if it was a heavy-duty item. You know, it can withstand a lot of punishment, don't get me wrong, but with something this big and this complex that took a lot of print time and took a lot of assembly time to put together, you gotta baby it, okay? And that brings us to the end of this massively long big travel camera video. I hope you were able to figure it all out. Please do ask me some questions. I do want to make sure that enough of you out there are building these and enjoying them. Thank you.